I'm Judy Brewster. I was 33 years old the night my own mother decided I wasn't worth a 3-hour drive. Not worth canceling dinner. Not worth leaving the turkey in the oven. Not worth a single missed glass of wine. The trauma surgeon cut me open for 6 hours. 4 broken ribs. A lacerated spleen. Internal bleeding so severe that somewhere in the middle of that surgery, my heart actually stopped for 11 seconds. And when I finally opened my eyes in that recovery room, there was no one. No flowers. No jacket on the chair. No hand holding mine. Just a fluorescent light buzzing overhead, a heart monitor counting out the seconds I almost didn't get to keep, and a whiteboard on the wall where someone had written 6 words in blue marker that I will never forget for as long as I live. Family notified. Declined to come. The charge nurse told me later, the way you tell someone their dog didn't make it. She had called my mother at 6 in the morning. She had told my mother that her daughter was in emergency surgery. She had told my mother that I might not survive. And my mother gave her an answer. A single sentence. 7 words that I will carry buried in my chest longer than the surgical scars on my body. We'll come if she dies. That was it. That was her answer. That was the entire weight my life carried in my own mother's hands at 6 o'clock on a Thursday morning. But here's the thing. Here's what none of them knew. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my sister, who was too busy basting a 20-pound turkey to pick up a phone that was ringing right next to her elbow. While I was lying in that hospital bed, alone, breathing through a machine, a man in a black wool jacket walked through the sliding glass doors of that hospital. He walked up to the front desk. He paid my entire bill in cash. $82,400. Counted out without flinching. And then he set a small wooden box on the nurse's station, wrapped in plain brown paper, and tied with white string, and he left exactly one instruction before he disappeared back into the snow. Don't let her open it until she gets home. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his face. I had never seen him before in my life. But what was inside that cedar box was about to unravel 16 years of lies my mother had spent half my life building, and reveal that the one person I thought had abandoned me had actually been watching over me, quietly, from the shadows, every single day since I was 17 years old. If you've ever shown up for everyone in your life, and gotten nothing back when it was your turn, stay with me. Because this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, give this video a like, and drop a single word in the comments, listening, so I know you're here with me. Because what I'm about to tell you took me 6 months to find the courage to say out loud. Let me take you back. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I had just walked off a double shift at St. Anne's Children's Hospital in Harrisburg. 12 hours sitting bedside with a 4-year-old boy named Eli, watching his oxygen numbers, listening to the soft mechanical breath of a ventilator that was keeping him alive. Then 12 more hours covering for a colleague whose own kid had come down with the flu. 24 straight hours. My scrubs smelled like antiseptic, and the vending machine coffee I had spilled down my front around 3 in the morning. My neck had a knot in it the size of a golf ball. My hands had that papery, dried out feeling they get after a full shift of latex gloves and hand sanitizer. And I should have gone home. I should have crawled into bed. I should have slept for 14 hours straight. But I didn't. Because I had promised my mother I would drive home for Thanksgiving. 3 hours up Route 15, through the Alleghenies, to a small town called Dunmore where my parents lived in a 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, and a 24-seat dining table my mother had bought on credit the year my sister Megan got engaged. I packed my overnight bag at 6 in the evening. I poured a thermos of black coffee. I texted my mother that I was on my way. She didn't text back. She never did. The sleet started just past Lewisburg. I dropped my speed to 40. Then 35. The wipers were slapping back and forth, throwing slush off the windshield in heavy grey sheets, and the road in front of me started to shimmer in a way that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. That silver shimmer on asphalt has a name. Black ice. I never even saw it happen. 1 second I was humming along to an old song on the radio, headlights cutting through the dark, thinking about whether my mother had remembered to set a place for me at the table this year. And the next second, the rear tires of my Camry broke loose underneath me. The car swung sideways, completely out of my control, and slammed into the metal guardrail at 52 miles an hour. The sound it made. God, I will never forget the sound it made. Like a giant crumpling a sheet of tinfoil in his fist. I remember the airbag exploding into my face. I remember a rib snapping inside my chest, a deep wet pop that I felt more than I heard. I remember cold air rushing in through the shattered driver's side window, and the taste of copper flooding into my mouth. And then, nothing. The paramedics told me later that I was conscious when they cut me out of that car with the jaws of life. That I was talking to them. That I asked them 3 times if they had called my mother. I don't remember any of it. When I finally opened my eyes again, 20 hours had passed. I was lying in a hospital bed at Geisinger Medical Center. There was a drainage tube coming out of my side. There was an 4 in each arm. There was a pain in my rib cage so sharp that every single breath I took felt like swallowing crushed glass. I turned my head, slowly, to the chair beside the bed. Empty. I turned my head, slowly, to the chair on the other side. Empty. I reached for my phone on the tray table with the only hand I could move. No missed calls. No texts. No voicemails. Just a lock screen photo of me and my mother from 2 Christmases ago, both of us smiling like we meant it. And I lay there, staring at that photo, and a thought started forming in the back of my mind. A thought I didn't want to think. A thought I had been pushing down for 33 years. A thought that was about to become a fact. But the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning sometimes, wasn't what I would learn about my mother. It was what I was about to learn about the empty chair beside my bed. The charge nurse came in around noon. Her name was Dana. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and she had the kind of soft, careful voice that nurses develop when they've spent 20 years delivering bad news to strangers. She checked my vitals. She adjusted my morphine drip. She made a note on my chart. And then she sat down on the edge of my bed. I have been a nurse for 9 years. I knew exactly what it meant when a nurse sits down on your bed. Judy, she said quietly. Your family knows you're here. I waited. She didn't look at me. I called the number in your emergency contacts at 6 o'clock this morning. I spoke to your mother. Still, she didn't look at me. She said they were hosting Thanksgiving dinner today. I felt my heart begin to climb up into my throat. She said they would come if things got worse. I have been trained to keep my face still when patients are watching me. I have been trained to deliver news without flinching. I held that training around me like a shield. Dana, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. What did she say exactly? Dana finally looked up at me. And the pity in her eyes was the worst thing I had ever seen on another human being's face. She said, "We'll come if she dies." The sentence dropped into the room like a stone into a still pond. I felt the ripples go through me one by one. The trauma surgeon, a man named Dr. Okafor, had written it in my chart, in his small precise handwriting, in the section labeled Family Contact. Family notified at 0605. Mother stated, "Will come if she dies." Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. That was me. Stable post-op. Not worth a 3-hour drive on a holiday, when there was a turkey in the oven and Megan's in-laws were arriving at noon. I lay there in that bed, and I did what I had always done my whole life. I calculated. My mother had a 24-seat dining table. Megan's fiancé's parents were coming. Megan's college friends. Megan's co-worker, who brought the good wine from the place in Philadelphia. 3 of my mother's church friends. 2 of my father's golf buddies. 24 seats. 24 people. There was no seat at that table for a daughter with a drainage tube and a morphine drip. There never really had been. But here is what I want you to understand, before I tell you what happened next. I am not the daughter in this story who is going to break. I am the daughter in this story who is going to remember. And somewhere out there, while I was lying in that bed counting backwards through every Thanksgiving of my entire life, an old man I hadn't seen in 16 years was already setting something in motion. Something he had been building, quietly, in secret, for over a decade. Something nobody in my family knew existed. And it was about to walk through the door of my hospital room in the form of a stranger in a black wool jacket. On the second day of my recovery, there was a knock at my door. A woman stepped in. Maybe 55 years old. Silver hair pinned back at the nape of her neck. Reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She was carrying a clipboard in one hand. And in the other hand, she was carrying a small rectangular package. Wrapped in brown craft paper. Tied with white kitchen string. The kind of wrapping that didn't belong on anything modern. It looked like it belonged on a care package mailed home from a soldier in 1962. Miss Brewster, she said. My name is Lorraine. I'm with Patient Services. She walked over to my tray table and set the package down on it carefully, the way you might set down a piece of porcelain. A gentleman dropped this off for you last night. I stared at the package. He was tall, she said. Older. He was wearing a black wool jacket. She glanced down at her clipboard. He also settled your account. I blinked at her. My account. Your hospital bill, dear. Surgery. Anesthesia. The room. All of it. Paid in full. She said it the same way she might have said, someone left you a casserole. Matter of fact. Routine. But there was nothing routine about a complete stranger walking into a hospital and writing a check for over $80,000. He left a message, Lorraine added. I wrote it down because it seemed important. She read it off the clipboard. He said, tell her not to open it until she gets home. She set the clipboard down. Did he leave a name? I asked. She shook her head slowly. Just the jacket. And the instructions. And then she walked out. And the door clicked shut behind her. And I was alone in that hospital room, with a package the size of a showbox sitting on my tray table. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. When I lifted it close to my face, the brown paper crinkled, and I caught a smell underneath it. A smell I hadn't smelled in 16 years. Cedar. The exact same smell as the inside of my grandfather's workshop. The shop he used to take me to on Saturdays when I was a kid. The shop where he taught me how to measure twice and cut once. The shop where he kept a little tin of butterscotch candies in the top drawer of his workbench for whenever I came to visit. The grandfather I hadn't seen since I was 17 years old. The grandfather my mother had cut out of our lives so completely that I wasn't even sure if he was still alive. I sat there holding that box. My ribs were screaming every time I moved. The cedar smell kept drifting up to my face like a question I wasn't ready to answer. And I did exactly what Lorraine had told me to do. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because deep down, in the place where you keep the truths you aren't ready to look at directly, I already knew. Whatever was inside that box was going to change everything. Stay with me. Because I'm about to tell you who that stranger really was. And the answer is not what you think. They discharged me on Friday afternoon. 2 days after the crash. 1 day after the Thanksgiving I missed. Nobody from my family came to pick me up. My co-worker Renata drove 45 minutes from Harrisburg in her old Subaru. She brought me a turkey sandwich from Wawa. She helped me into the passenger seat. She didn't ask a single question about why my mother wasn't there. That's the thing about emergency room nurses. We know exactly when not to ask. My apartment was cold when we got there. I had left in a hurry on Wednesday and forgotten to turn the heat up. Renata adjusted my sling, set my discharge medications on the counter, and microwaved me a mug of broth because I couldn't lift my arm high enough to reach the microwave buttons. She set the cedar box on my kitchen counter, between the toaster and the fruit bowl. It looked wrong there. Too solemn for a Formica countertop. You going to open that? She asked, pulling on her coat. I shook my head. Not yet. She didn't push. She hugged me carefully, the way you hug someone whose ribs are being held together with surgical wire. And then she left. The apartment went quiet. I sat at my kitchen table with my broth and stared at that box and thought about the number on my hospital bill. $82,400. Somebody had written a check for that. Somebody in a black jacket who smelled like cedar. Saturday morning, my phone rang for the very first time since the crash. Not a text. Not a notification. An actual phone call. I didn't recognize the number. 570 area code. Scranton. I picked up. Miss Brewster. My name is Daniel Frost. I'm an estate attorney with Frost and Associates in Dunmore. I sat up too fast and my ribs reminded me not to do that. I'm calling about your grandfather. Walter Brewster. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in 16 years. Walter Brewster. My father's father. The man my mother had cut out of our family so completely that he had become a cautionary tale she told at dinner parties. Your grandfather passed away, Mr. Frost said quietly. 3 weeks ago. At home. Peacefully. The world stopped spinning for a second. 3 weeks. My grandfather had been dead for 3 weeks. And nobody in my family had told me. Not my father. The man whose father he was. Not my mother. Who apparently had time to plan a 24-seat Thanksgiving dinner, but didn't have 30 seconds to pick up a phone and say the words, your grandfather is gone. Mr. Frost, I said. And I could hear my own voice shaking now. I haven't spoken to my grandfather since I was 17 years old. I'm aware of that, Miss Brewster. There was a long pause. Your grandfather was aware of that too. He was also fully aware that you would be the last to know. And then he said something that made my entire body go cold. Miss Brewster. I believe a package was delivered to you at the hospital. A cedar box. My eyes went to the counter. The box was still sitting there. Untouched. The string still tied. Yes, I whispered. Don't open it yet, he said. Not over the phone. Not alone. I'd like you to come to my office on Tuesday. There are documents you need to see. And there are things your grandfather wanted you to understand, before anyone else in your family contacts you about his estate. He paused. And Miss Brewster, they will contact you. Very soon. So we need to move quickly. I met Daniel Frost the following Tuesday, at his office on Main Street in Dunmore. A narrow brick building with a brass nameplate on the door. A waiting room that smelled like old leather and lemon furniture polish. Mr. Frost was in his late 60s. Lean. Precise. Silver hair combed straight back. He was wearing a black wool jacket. The same black wool jacket. It was you, I said. At the hospital. He nodded once, very slightly. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 23 years, Miss Brewster. I drafted his will. I managed his trust. And for the last 16 years, I have been the person he spoke to most about you. I set the cedar box on his desk between us. Still wrapped. Still tied. He looked at it the way you look at a letter you've been waiting to deliver for a very, very long time. You were the first person I called after Walter died, he said. Not your father. You? That was Walter's instruction. Written. Notarized. Signed. He opened a manila folder on his desk and slid a single page across the polished wood. I looked down. My full legal name was typed in the center of the document. Judith and Brewster. Sole beneficiary. Your grandfather established a revocable trust in 2011, Mr. Frost said quietly. He funded it with the proceeds from the sale of his machine shop, his personal savings, and a rental property he owned in Scranton. He folded his hands. It became irrevocable upon his death 3 weeks ago. You are the only named beneficiary. There is no one else. There are no contingencies. I stared at the page. Mr. Frost, I said. And my voice came out so quiet I could barely hear it myself. Why? He looked at me for a long moment. And then he said something I will remember for the rest of my life. Because, Miss Brewster, your grandfather never stopped watching over you. Not for one single day. And he wanted to make absolutely certain that when the moment came, when your family failed you completely, there would be a foundation under your feet so that you would not fall. I felt the tears coming and I could not stop them. He told me, the very last time I saw him alive, that he had spent 16 years preparing for this exact week. The last time I saw my grandfather, I was 17 years old and he was 63. It was a Sunday in October. He had driven down from Dunmore in his old Ford pickup, the one with the bench seat, and the AM radio that only picked up 2 stations, to watch me play a JV field hockey game that didn't matter to anyone in the entire world except him. After the game, he took me to a diner on Route 11. He ordered us both grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. And while we ate, he asked me about my classes, my college list, whether I had thought any more about applying to nursing school. He listened the way he always listened, leaning forward slightly, one scarred hand wrapped around his coffee mug, not checking his watch, not glancing at the television above the counter. When he dropped me off at home that evening, he stood on the porch for a minute longer than usual. And he said something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "Kiddo, wherever you land in this life, I'll know how to find you." I thought it was just the kind of thing grandfathers say. 3 weeks later, my mother sat my father and me down at the kitchen table. She said Walter was no longer welcome in our home. She said he had become difficult, interfering, controlling. She said it was for the best. My father stood at the kitchen counter and did not say a single word in his own father's defense. And just like that, Walter Brewster disappeared from my life. No goodbye. No phone call. No explanation that made any sense at all. Just a closed door. And a silence that lasted 16 years. Until a man in a black wool jacket walked into a hospital and paid my bill. If you're still with me, if your throat is tight right now, do me one small favor. Drop the word Grandpa in the comments. Just that one word. Because I need to know I'm not the only one who had someone love them from the shadows. And subscribe right now, because the part that comes next is the part that broke me. Before I opened that box, I called my mother. I sat in Daniel Frost's parking lot with the engine running and my ribs aching against the seatbelt, and I dialed the number I had known by heart since I was 4 years old. She picked up on the fourth ring. Judy? Not sweetie. Not honey. Just my name. Flat. Like a file label in a drawer. Hi, Mom. I'm out of the hospital. I heard. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the surgery. She didn't ask about the drainage tube they had pulled out of my side the day before. I took a breath. Mom? Grandpa Walter died. A pause. Then? I know. I felt something inside my chest go very, very still. 3 weeks ago. Yes. And nobody told me. Judy? You don't understand what that man put this family through. He was difficult. He was unstable. He made your father's life miserable. We made a decision 16 years ago, and it was the right decision. Her voice had that clipped, rehearsed quality. The voice she used when neighbors asked at backyard barbecues why Walter never came to Christmas anymore. I pressed the phone harder against my ear and felt my ribs flare. A sharp spike of pain that ran from my sternum straight back to my spine, as if my body was trying to tell me something my brain already knew. Mom, why did you really cut him off? Tell me the real reason. Silence. And then. Quieter. Don't go digging, Judy. Some things are better left alone. Like me. In a hospital room. She hung up. I sat there in that parking lot with the phone dark in my lap, breathing through the rib pain. In my 9 years of being a nurse, I have learned one universal truth. When a patient's family says don't ask questions, there is always something in the chart they don't want you to read. So I called Aunt Pam that same afternoon. Pam was my father's younger sister. The one who still mailed me a birthday card every year with a $20 bill folded inside. The one who always seemed vaguely uncomfortable at family gatherings, like she was sitting on a secret she had been ordered not to share. Pam, I said. What really happened with Grandpa Walter? She didn't answer right away. I heard a kitchen timer ding in the background. A chair scraping against tile. And then she said it. Your mother happened, Judy. I closed my eyes. Your grandfather confronted Carol. At Thanksgiving. 16 years ago. In front of the entire family. Confronted her about what? About you, sweetheart. About how she treated you. About the difference between how she treated you and how she treated Megan. I couldn't speak. He didn't yell, Judy. He didn't raise his voice once. He just put his fork down, looked your mother in the eye, and asked her one single question. She paused. He asked her why you were sitting at the children's table when you were 19 years old. And he asked her why Megan was sitting at the head of the table next to her. And what did Mom say? In front of the whole family. In front of the neighbors. In front of the church people. Your mother looked at him, and she said. Because Judy doesn't mind. I felt the tears start before I could stop them. Judy? He didn't say another word. He stood up. He put on his coat. And he walked out of that house. And your mother spent the next 4 weeks calling every single relative we had, every neighbor on that block, every member of the church auxiliary, and she told them all that Walter had lost his mind. That he was making threats. That he had become dangerous. None of it was true. None of it. I was there. I watched her do it. Why didn't anyone push back, Pam? I tried, sweetheart. Your father told me to stay out of it. And Walter? Walter just went quiet. He stopped calling. He stopped showing up. She paused. And then she said something that planted a seed in my chest that would not stop growing. But Judy, he kept things. What things? Everything. Every letter Carol sent back. Every birthday card she returned. Every Christmas gift she refused to let you have. He kept all of it in a folder in his workshop. I always wondered if someday somebody would need to see them. I drove back to Mr. Frost's office the very next morning. And I opened the box. My hands were shaking when I untied the string. The brown paper fell away. And underneath was a small wooden box. Cedar. Unfinished. With dovetail joints my grandfather had clearly cut by hand. I could see the faint pencil lines where he had measured. I could see the sanding marks where his thumb had worn the wood smooth. Inside, the box was lined with soft brown felt. And resting on top of that felt was a single sealed envelope. My name on the front. In my grandfather's handwriting. Blocky capital letters. The handwriting of a man who had worked with tools his whole life. Beneath that envelope were 16 more. Each one dated on the outside. One for every single year since the cutoff. 2008, 2009, 2010, all the way down to 2024. Those are letters he wrote to you, Mr. Frost said softly. Every single year. He mailed the first 3. Your mother returned them all unopened. After that, he stopped sending them. But he never stopped writing them. Below the letters was a thin manila folder. I opened it. Inside was a tuition disbursement record from my nursing school. A scholarship I had received in my sophomore year. The Keystone Healthcare Workers Grant. $40,000 over 2 years. The scholarship I had thought came from the school had actually come from Walter's Trust. My grandfather had paid for half of my nursing degree. And he had never told me. I started to cry. And then I saw the very last thing in the box. At the very bottom. Underneath the folder. A photograph. Taken at my nursing school graduation. 9 years ago. The auditorium. The stage. The rows of folding chairs. The cap and gown. And in the very last row of that auditorium. Standing near the exit. Half hidden in the shadows. An old man. In a black wool jacket. His hands clasped in front of him. Watching. My grandfather had been there. At every single milestone of my life. I just hadn't known where to look. I opened the sealed envelope on top with shaking hands. Inside was a single line. Written in those same blocky capital letters. You were never alone, kiddo. I sat in Mr. Frost's office for 2 hours reading those letters. 16 years of a one-sided conversation with a granddaughter who never wrote back because she didn't know the conversation was even happening. The early ones were short. Updates on his shop. A joke about his neighbor's golden retriever. A line about the weather. But by 2012, the letters had changed. He had started tracking my life. Judy graduated from St. Anne's nursing program on May 14, 2015. I sat in the back row. She didn't see me. She looked happy. Judy was promoted to charge nurse in the pediatric ICU this spring. She was the youngest in her department. I am so proud I could burst. Judy moved to a new apartment on Walnut Street. The building with the blue awning. I drove past it once. I didn't get out of the car. He had subscribed to the hospital newsletter where staff promotions were announced. He had asked Mr. Frost to check public records for my address changes once a year. He had built an entire quiet system of careful, patient, legal due diligence. The way a machinist would engineer a way to hold a piece of metal in place under pressure. No drama. No confrontation. Just careful, patient attention to the only thing in the world he had left that mattered. Me. And then I picked up his very last letter. Dated 3 months before his death. Written in a shakier hand than the earlier ones. The capitals slightly crooked. The pen pressing harder on the downstrokes. Kiddo. I am 79 years old and the doctor tells me my heart is slowing down. I am not afraid. I built things my whole life. Machines. Parts. Joints that held together under pressure for decades. The one thing I built that I am proudest of in my entire life is you. Even though you don't know it yet. This money I am leaving you is not a prize. It is a foundation. I did not save it so you could buy a house or retire early. I saved it so you could keep doing the thing you were always going to do anyway. So you could take care of other people. Without ever once having to wonder if anyone in this world was taking care of you. Use it however you want. But if you are looking for a suggestion from an old man, find the kids who don't have anybody sitting in their last row. And you be there. You be the last row for them. I love you, kiddo. I have loved you every single day. Grandpa. I set the letter down on Daniel Frost's desk and I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. But what came next was something I never could have predicted. Because 2 days after I read that letter, my phone started ringing. And every single person who hadn't called me when I was bleeding on a highway shoulder was about to discover that the daughter they had spent 33 years dismissing had just inherited everything. It happened on a Thursday. 9 days after the crash. I was home. My ribs were still wrapped. I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through the last of Walter's letters. And my phone lit up like a switchboard. 3 missed calls from my mother in 12 minutes. 2 from my father. The first time he had called me directly in over a year. 1 from Megan. And a text from my mother that read, "We need to talk about Dad's estate. Call me immediately." Not Grandpa. Not Walter. Dad's estate. My father's father had been dead for a month. And my mother had not mentioned him a single time. Not at Thanksgiving. Not in that cold phone call after my surgery. Not when I called her from Mr. Frost's parking lot. But now. Suddenly. He was Dad again. I set the phone face up on the table, and I watched the notifications stack up one by one. Carol. Judy. Pick up the phone. Carol. Judy. This is important. Megan. Hey. Mom says there's something about Grandpa's stuff. Can you call her? Gary. Judy. Please call your mother. 4 people who had not called when I was bleeding on a highway shoulder. 4 people who had not called when I was in surgery for 6 hours. 4 people who had not called when I woke up alone in a recovery room with a whiteboard that said decline to come. Now? They were blowing up my phone. Because there was money on the table. I picked up the last voicemail. My mother's voice. And this was the part. This was the part that made my ribs ache harder than the actual car crash had. Her voice was warm. Sweet. The voice I had not heard from her since I was 12 years old. Sweetheart. We've been so worried about you. I am so sorry we couldn't make it to the hospital. Megan's dinner was already planned, and we just couldn't reschedule. But we want to make it right. Come home. We are family. I deleted the voicemail. I did not call back for 3 days. I needed the time. Not to plan revenge. I want to be very clear about that. I am not a person who builds traps. I am a pediatric intensive care nurse. I troubleshoot. I identify the problem. I gather the data. And I implement a solution that protects the patient. The patient in this case was me. On Monday, I called Daniel Frost. My mother wants me to come to a family dinner, I said. She's framing it as a reconciliation. But she mentioned the estate in her first text. I expected that, Mr. Frost said quietly. He sounded tired. The way people sound when they have watched a slow-motion car wreck for 16 years. Judy? The trust is airtight. Walter excluded all other family members by name. There is a no contest clause. There is no legal mechanism for your parents to challenge any of this. I want you there, I said. He paused. At the dinner. Yes. Why? Because my mother has spent 16 years telling a story about a man who could not defend himself. And now he can. Not with shouting. Not with a lawsuit. Just with the letters he kept. And the truth he documented. In his own handwriting. I could hear Mr. Frost turning something over in his mind. Walter would have hated a scene, he said softly. But he kept those letters for a reason. He kept the birthday cards your mother returned. He kept the church group email where Carol told the congregation he had been institutionalized. Which was a complete lie. I hadn't known about the email. I'll be there, he said. Dinner is Saturday. My mother's house. Extended family. She'll have an audience. So will you, he said. I spent the rest of that week preparing the way I prepare for a code blue. Systematically. Without emotion. Checking every line and every lead. Mr. Frost couriered over the documents I needed. The trust instrument showing me as sole beneficiary. The tuition disbursement records from the Keystone grant. The returned mail log. A spreadsheet Walter had maintained for 16 years, listing every letter, birthday card, and Christmas gift he had sent that had come back marked return to sender, in my mother's handwriting. There were 47 entries. 47 pieces of love my grandfather had tried to send me. 47 times my mother had intercepted them, and returned them to him without ever telling me they existed. I also requested a copy of my own medical chart from Geisinger. Specifically the family contact note from the night of the crash. Dr. Okafor's handwriting was small and precise. Family notified 0605. Mother stated, we will come if she dies. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. I made 3 copies. One for my bag. One for my filing cabinet at home. And one in a sealed envelope that I gave to Renata. Because PICU nurses always have a backup plan for the backup plan. I did not rehearse a speech. I did not write talking points. I did not fantasize about watching my mother's face crumble in front of her extended family. I just organized the evidence. The way I would organize a patient file. Chronological. Documented. And clean enough that anyone reading it would reach the same conclusion. My grandfather had loved me quietly for 16 years. My mother had erased him loudly. The documents made that fact inarguable. And on Friday night, I ironed a blouse, took 3 ibuprofen for my ribs, and went to bed early. I slept better than I had in weeks. There is a particular kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you are going to say. And exactly when you are going to say it. But what I did not know, what I could not have known, was that my mother had been preparing for this dinner too. And she had her own plan. The drive to Dunmore took 3 hours. Same road. Same mountains. Same stretch of Route 15 where my Camry had hit the guardrail 2 weeks earlier. I drove past the accident site without stopping. There was a fresh scar on the metal guardrail. A silver scrape against the rust where my car had folded. But somebody had already placed a reflector cone beside it. And life had moved on. At 5:47 in the evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway. 8 cars in the drive. My mother had invited the whole family. I picked up my bag. I checked the documents one more time. And I got out of the car. My mother answered the door in a cream-colored sweater and pearl earrings. Her hair freshly set. Her smile wide enough to sell real estate. "Judy? Oh, sweetheart. Come in." She pulled me into a hug. Carefully. Because even Carol Brewster knew better than to squeeze a woman with 4 broken ribs. And over her shoulder, I could see the dining room. The 24-seat table. Set for 12 tonight. White linen. The good china. A centerpiece of autumn leaves and miniature pumpkins that Megan had clearly found on Pinterest. Aunt Pam was in the kitchen drying a serving dish. She caught my eye and gave me a single small nod. The kind of nod that said, "I know why you're here." My cousins Tyler and Bridget were on the couch with their phones. Megan was at the sideboard pouring wine. Her fiancé Derek was making small talk with my father, who stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Mr. Frost was not here yet. He had told me he would arrive at 6:15. 15 minutes after me. Enough time for my mother to settle comfortably into her performance. Before the curtain went up. "You look thin, sweetheart," my mother said, steering me toward the living room. "We need to get some food in you." Megan made her butternut squash soup. Her hand was on my elbow, guiding me the way she had always guided me. Toward the seat she had chosen. At the end of the table she had set. In the version of the family she had scripted. "Actually, Mom," I said, "I'd like to wait until everyone is seated." She blinked at me. "Of course, sweetheart." She was still smiling. She had no idea what was in my bag. She had no idea that Mr. Frost was 12 minutes away from her front door. And she had no idea that the woman who was standing in her foyer right now was not the same Judy who had driven home for Thanksgiving 2 weeks earlier. We sat down at the table at 6 o'clock. My mother placed me between Megan and Aunt Pam. A strategic seating choice. Designed to keep me flanked by family loyalty. The soup was served. Grace was said by my mother. She thanked God for bringing her family back together the way it was meant to be. Megan squeezed my arm. Derek complimented the table setting. My father did not say a single word. And then, at exactly 6:15, the doorbell rang. I stood up. "That's for me," I said. My mother's eyes narrowed. Just for a fraction of a second. Before the smile snapped back onto her face like it had been pinned there. I walked through the dining room. Past the centerpiece. Past the 24-seat table. And I opened the front door. Daniel Frost was standing on the porch. Black wool jacket over a pressed white shirt. Carrying a leather briefcase. I led him into the dining room. "Everyone," I said. "This is Daniel Frost." He was Grandpa Walter's attorney. The entire table went still. Megan set her wine glass down very slowly. My father looked at his soup bowl. Aunt Pam folded her hands. My mother recovered first. She always did. "How lovely," she said brightly. "Please. Sit down. We have plenty." Mr. Frost Saturday. My mother served him soup with her own hands. And then, while everyone was eating and the small talk was filling the room like gas right before a match, my mother made her move. She set her spoon down. She reached across the table. And she took my hand. "Judy? Sweetheart. Your father and I have been talking. About Grandpa Walter's estate." She paused for effect. scanning the table to make sure she had everyone's full attention. We know that Walter left some things behind. And we think, as a family, that the right thing to do is to share them. Walter was a family man. He would not have wanted one person to inherit everything while the rest of us were left out in the cold. She looked at Mr. Frost. Then back at me. And she squeezed my hand. It's what he would have wanted. I let her finish. I let the room absorb her version of events. And then, very slowly, I reached into my bag. I set the stack of letters down on the white linen tablecloth beside my soup bowl. 16 yellowed envelopes. Each one dated in my grandfather's blocky handwriting. The entire table went silent. My mother's hand was still extended across the table toward mine. Frozen in mid-reach. These, I said quietly, are letters that Grandpa Walter wrote to me. One every single year for 16 years. I looked up. But I did not look at my mother. I looked at Aunt Pam. I looked at Tyler and Bridget. I looked at Derek. The witnesses. He mailed the first 3. Mom? You returned them. I let that sit. After that, he stopped mailing them. But he never stopped writing them. I picked up the envelope dated 2013. I opened it. And I read 2 sentences aloud. The 2 sentences about the Thanksgiving table. About Megan sitting at the head next to my mother. About me eating with the cousins' children at 19 years old. About Walter setting his fork down. And asking the single question that cost him his entire family. Why does Judy eat with the children? Aunt Pam pressed her hand to her mouth. Bridget looked at her phone, then quietly placed it face down on the table. My mother opened her mouth. But I kept going. I placed the tuition records down on the table. Grandpa paid for 2 full years of my nursing school. Through a private trust. He did it anonymously. I did not know until last week. I placed the returned mail log down beside it. 47 letters and gifts. Sent over 16 years. All returned to him. In your handwriting, Mom. And then, last of all, I placed the chart note from Geisinger Medical Center on the table. This, I said, is from the night of my car crash. The charge nurse called you at 6 o'clock in the morning to tell you that your daughter was in emergency surgery. I read it aloud. Steady. The way I would read a lab result to a parent in the pediatric intensive care unit. Factual. Calm. No inflection. Family notified 0605. Mother stated, we will come if she dies. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. The room did not gasp. It did not erupt. It just went very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when 12 people are all holding their breath at the same time and nobody wants to be the first to exhale. My mother broke first. Her chair scraped back across the hardwood floor. She stood up. Her hands flat on the white linen tablecloth. The cream sweater. The pearl earrings. The Pinterest centerpiece. All of it suddenly looked like a costume that did not fit anymore. This is. You're twisting everything, she said. Her voice climbed. Walter was unstable. He was controlling. He tried to turn this family against me. And I did what any mother would do. I protected my children. From what? Aunt Pam said quietly from the other end of the table. My mother's head snapped toward her sister-in-law. From a man who could not mind his own business. He asked why Judy ate with the children, Carol. That is all he did. That is the only thing he ever did. He humiliated me. In front of my own family. And there it was. My mother's mask slipped completely. And what was underneath was not grief. It was not fear. It was not love. It was rage. 16 years of carefully maintained narrative crumbling in front of the very people she had spent 16 years convincing. She turned to me. You have always been like this. Dramatic. Difficult. You think because he left you money that makes you special. He poisoned you against us, Judy. He was a bitter old man who could not let go. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I stayed in my chair, with my hands folded in my lap, and my ribs aching, and my voice as level as a flat line. Mr. Frost, I said. Mr. Frost opened his briefcase. The trust is irrevocable, he said calmly. Judith is the sole named beneficiary. Walter excluded all other family members by name, with a no contest clause. Any attempt to challenge this trust results in automatic forfeiture of any residual claim. The documents have already been filed with the Lackawanna County Surrogates Court. My mother stared at him. Then at me. Then back at him. Her eyes were wet. But her jaw was set. You planned this, she whispered. No, Mom, I said quietly. Grandpa did. I stood up. Not quickly. Not angrily. The way you stand up at the end of a long shift. When you have done everything you can. You said you would come if I died. I picked up the cedar box from where I had set it on the chair beside me. I lived. I looked at her. We're done. Nobody moved for about 5 full seconds. And then Aunt Pam pushed her chair back. She walked around the entire length of that 24-seat dining table. And she came to stand beside me. She did not say a single word. She just stood there. A witness. Choosing a side. The way witnesses do when the evidence is finally clear. Tyler stood up. He followed her. Bridget stood up. She followed him. Megan stayed seated, her wine glass untouched, staring down at the stack of letters like they were a math problem she could not solve. Derek studied the tablecloth. My mother's performance shifted. The rage melted into tears. Not the quiet kind. The loud, shoulders shaking, gasping kind. The kind that fills a room and demands attention. The kind designed to make every single person within earshot stop what they are doing and immediately comfort the person who is crying. How could you do this to me? She said, dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her linen napkin. I gave you everything, Judy. I raised you. And this is how you repay me. In front of everyone. I had seen this before. In the PICU. When a parent, who had been neglecting a sick child for months, suddenly started sobbing the very moment social services walked through the door. The tears were real. The grief was real. But it was not grief for the child. It was grief for the version of the story that was no longer believable. My father had not moved during any of it. He sat in his chair at the head of the table. His hands in his lap, staring down at the letters in front of him. His lips were pressed together. And his chin trembled. Just once. A single involuntary quiver. And I knew, in that one quiet moment, that he was thinking about his father. About the 23 years of phone calls he could have made and did not. About the funeral he attended and did not tell his own daughter about. About the silence he had chosen. Over and over again. For 16 years. He did not apologize. He did not stand up. He did not say a single word. And that silence. That was its own kind of answer. Megan finally spoke. So, there's nothing we can do. Legally. Mr. Frost shook his head. The trust is final. Megan picked up her wine glass. And she drank. I gathered the letters. I placed them carefully back inside the cedar box. 16 years of a conversation I had never known I was having. Written by a man I had never known was listening. The box felt different in my hands now. Lighter somehow. The way a suitcase feels lighter on the trip home. Because you have finally left the heaviest thing behind. I picked up my phone from the table. No new messages. No missed calls. For 2 whole weeks. That blank screen had been an indictment. Proof that nobody cared enough to call. Now? It was something else entirely. I turned the phone face down on the table for a beat. Just long enough to let my mother see it. Long enough to let the entire room see it. Then I picked it up. And I put it in my pocket. The silence was mine now. "Aunt Pam," I said. She squeezed my arm. "Mr. Frost. I'll call you on Monday. About the fund." He nodded once. And then I looked at my mother. One last time. She was sitting in her chair. The napkin twisted in her hands. Her mascara tracking in dark rivers down both of her cheeks. Surrounded by the Thanksgiving table she had spent 16 years building. The china. The linen. The centerpiece. The narrative. All of it still intact. Except for the one single thing that mattered. The truth about who she really was. I did not say goodbye. I did not need to. I walked out through the front door. Into the November dark. And the cold air hit my face. And my ribs ached one more time. A sharp clean ache. Like a stitch being pulled. Like something finally closing. And then the ache softened. The way pain does. When the healing has finally started. And your body knows it before your brain does. 6 weeks later. I sat back in Daniel Frost's office. And I signed the papers establishing the Walter Brewster Fund. The trust had been substantial. Not a fortune. But a machinist's lifetime of careful saving and quiet, steady, intelligent investing. Enough to endow an annual scholarship. For first-generation nursing students. At 3 Pennsylvania schools. With a preference. In the language Mr. Frost and I drafted together. For applicants who, quote, demonstrate resilience in the absence of family support. Mr. Frost framed Walter's graduation photograph and hung it on the wall of his office. I kept the cedar box on the nightstand beside my bed. Some mornings I open it. And I read one of the letters. Not all of them. Just one. The way you would revisit a quiet conversation with someone you love. Someone who is no longer here. The very first scholarship was awarded in March. To a 20-year-old young woman from Allentown. Who had been in foster care since she was 12 years old. She did not know who funded the grant. She wrote a thank you letter to the committee. I read that letter in Mr. Frost's office. And I thought about the thank you letter I had written 9 years ago to a scholarship committee that had really just been my grandfather. Sitting alone at his kitchen table. Reading my words. And carefully placing them in a folder. My mother called me once. 3 weeks after the dinner. I did not pick up. My father never called. Not once. Megan sent a text that said we should talk. I replied that I did not think we should. Aunt Pam and I had dinner together every other week. She told me stories about Walter I had never heard. How he had built that cedar box in his workshop over the course of an entire year. Sanding the dovetail joints by hand until they were seamless and smooth. How he had told her once. Years ago. That the box was for Judy. When the time comes. My ribs healed. The scars faded to thin white lines along my left side. By February, I could take a full deep breath again without wincing. A deep clean inhale that filled my lungs all the way to the bottom. And every single time I did it, I thought about the very last line of Walter's last letter. You were never alone, kiddo. Neither were they. Not now. I used to think that family meant the people who shared your last name. Your dinner table. Your blood. I was wrong. Family is the person standing in the last row of your graduation in a black wool jacket. Watching. Saying nothing. Making absolutely certain that you will never fall without someone there to catch you. Family is not who shows up when the photographs are being taken. Family is who shows up when nobody is watching. That is my story. One car crash. One sentence I will never unhear. And one quiet old man who never stopped showing up. For a granddaughter, he was not allowed to love out loud. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, I need to ask you something. I need you to do 3 small things for me. If somebody in your life loved you from a distance, from the shadows, from the last row, and you never got the chance to thank them, drop their name in the comments below. Just their first name. Let's fill the comments tonight with the names of the people who showed up for us, even when we did not know they were there. Let's make sure not a single one of them is forgotten. And then, hit that subscribe button right now, because next week I am sharing another story about a woman whose entire family forgot her 60th birthday, and what she did the very next morning that none of them will ever recover from. You do not want to miss it. And finally, hit the like button. It is free. It takes 1 single second. And it helps these stories reach the next person who is sitting alone tonight, wondering if anybody in the entire world sees them. Because somebody does. Somebody always has. You were never alone. You are not alone now. I will see you in the next one.